Yeah, and if you are a Christian, I'd love for you to just pray for this channel and pray for those people because some of them aren't in a position where they have access to the gospel very much.
Welcome to the Bible in 1 Year podcast, brought to you by two Brits and a Bible.
Today is day 340, covering 2 Corinthians 10, 11, 12, and 13.
So closing out the letter to the churches in Corinth here, starts with Paul in verse 10 saying, "By meekness and gentleness of Christ I appeal to you. I, Paul, who am timid when face to face with you, but bold towards you when I'm away." It was this, I'm timid when I'm face to face with you. I think, I need to perhaps look it up, but I'm pretty sure that Paul was actually a very unimpressive person. Like, I'm pretty sure he was short. I don't know how they know this stuff, but he wasn't very attractive. He didn't talk particularly well. I believe he had a stutter. And I think that's where the thorn in my flesh thing that I've prayed for you to take away from me came from, which we'll come to later today.
Yeah,
But it's like, you don't need to have a certain charisma. You don't need to be able to do stuff. Like, it's, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called, right? He chose Moses, who had a stutter. He's got Paul here, who's preaching to pretty much the majority of the new church. Don't worry about how you look, how you sound. If God's telling you to do something, do it, and he will do the rest.
that's good straight away. What's interesting about that is that's also Jesus, right? Because Jesus is said to be sort of very average looking, everything. Like he didn't on the external seem special. So that's that. It's the same sort of thing with a lot of the men of God, the people of God. So yeah, very good. All right. So then, interesting. You've put that's where that is. So I'd love to hear what you're going to say. So 2 Corinthians 10 verse 5, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. We take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. I know where you're going with this. Okay, cool. My point is quite generic, really, in some ways, but it just is become well versed in the Bible, because that way you can demolish arguments against it, any pretension against it. You can do it because you know the content, right? And that's good evangelism. So that's another reason to pick up your Bibles and get reading. All right. I know what
Absolutely.
you're going to say, and I'm looking forward to hearing it.
My point is, that's where that is. Like, I've heard that take captive every thought, make it obedient to Christ. Could never have told you where that was in the Bible. So when that popped up, I was like, oh, cool.
Yeah, love that. Well, okay, that's a bit of an anticlimax for me, but the point that you make about taking captive every thought is this idea of taking ownership. And anyway, yeah, you can just watch from Genesis 1, the first video, and just keep going. Eventually, Adam will talk about that.
Well, no, I want to know what point I made. It sounded good.
You make the point of, like, if we're struggling with sin and stuff like that, you can literally take captive every thought. You've used that quote with me a few times. So, anyways, very good.
Sounds wise.
It was wise, biblically wise. So yeah, 2 Corinthians 10 verse 18, it is not the one who commends himself who's approved, but the one whom the Lord commends. And I had a little smile when you said God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called, because that's my note for that verse.
Oh, mate, that's fantastic. I hadn't seen that. That's so cool.
Sweet. And then just one more from me before your next point. So 2 Corinthians 11 verse 9, I've kept myself from being a burden to you in any way and will continue to do so. And I just think that that's a good sort of practice for us as Christians. As evangelists, we shouldn't weigh people down too much. Conviction is different from, like, oppressing or suppressing people, but just leading a good example of a good Christian life. Generally, you just don't want to burden people, be a weight on people. You want to be a light for people. You want to be an example for people. I just thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, mate, that's good. That's fantastic.
Sweet.
Yeah, so my next point we referenced previously, and I think I quoted part of the Bible about some of the stuff that Paul's been up to, like the difficulties he's faced, but he just lists it here so beautifully, where he says in 2 Corinthians 11, 24 and 25, 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes minus one, which is specific because 40 lashes should have killed you. So they did 39, so you didn't quite die. 5 times 40 lashes minus one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a day and a night in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move, in danger from rivers, bandits, yada, yada, yada. But it's just like, Flip, he's been through the mill, isn't he?
He has. Yeah, it's crazy. I had that written down as well, but I'm glad you read it out because, yeah, he's gone through so much.
Yeah. And it's just another testament to how strong his conviction in Christ must have been to have taken that sort of a beating and stay true to his faith in God. How people don't see it, just like we said before, in the West, we're so soft,
Pampered.
like, yeah, pampered, great word. But yeah, it's true, man.
Yeah, yeah. And adding to that, so 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7, it talks about the fact that he has a thorn in his flesh, which is there to torment him, right? So Paul is I'm not going to say a perfect example because that's Jesus, but he's a very good example of what a good suffering Christian looks like, right? But that doesn't lose faith, and also it has plenty of glory as well and recognition. But then on top of that, he's also a perfect example of he's not perfect like Jesus, right? He has sin. He has this thorn in his flesh, and he prays 3 times to have it removed, and it won't be removed. He can't get rid of it. So it's okay for us to struggle with sin. We shouldn't be ashamed of that. What we should do is, much like Paul here brings it to light and says, look, I've got this sin, right? We need to do the same, because as soon as you bring sin into light, it loses its power.
Yeah.
So that's that one there.
I just Googled very quickly what was Paul's thorn in his flesh, and they Guda suggests the thorn refers to the messenger of Satan who harmed Paul during his third heaven experience. The thorn is most commonly interpreted in relation to persecutions or hardship Paul faced. So I thought that could have been the stutter, and I think I'd heard that somewhere before, perhaps incorrectly. But just some of the hardships. It's like, God, can you please like take me off boats or something? Give me, yeah.
That brings me to my final point. I'll just quickly say this one then. So 2 Corinthians 12, verse 2. It says, I went to third heaven, caught up to the third heaven, and he didn't know if he was in his body or out of his body. He's not sure. So I just put third heaven ? Like, do you know about anything about this?
It was above our pay grade until I accidentally found out the answer, I suppose.
Cool.
Yeah. All right, my last point on here. So 2 Corinthians 13:5, examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Oh, don't know quite where to go with that, really, because I mean, I like the idea of examining yourself to see whether you're in the faith, because you can sort of weigh up, are you seeing fruit? Are you doing these things? Are you spending time in the word, in relationship with God? Are you praying? Are you doing this and the other? But then test yourselves. How do you test yourself? Like, I don't know, more of a question than anything. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm honestly not sure. I think part of it is going to be like conviction, right? I failed a test sort of yesterday myself.
Oh,
so yeah, it sucks. But I think that's part of it. But yeah, other than that,
could go back to the whole love is patient, love is kind thing. And
right.
that test, am I patient? Am I being patient? Like, I'm going through a stage of my kids just driving me insane, which is mostly a me and a lack of sleep thing, I believe, because they're just cute little kids. Yeah. But all that thing, like, find ways, I suppose, that if anything, that's what we can encourage ourselves with, really, here.
Yeah. Great point. And that's another way of testing ourselves. Just ask God as well, right? Am I doing the right thing? And he'll give you pointers. That's interesting. We've got a little bit of time. I thought it would be cool for you to just announce that we've got some friends in Sudan. We didn't.
Yeah, we've so it's so funny because back when we sort of first started this, we had more people listening to the episodes via the Buzzsprout podcast, and you can see a great breakdown in geography of that. And then in recent sort of weeks, it's gone far more heavily onto the YouTube side of things of people viewing it, which is fantastic. We don't see the breakdown of where people are watching from, but I did just check the Buzzsprout, and we did have some downloads from Sudan, which is fantastic. I spent a couple of days in South Sudan in Juba, and that was a very eye-opening experience. So thank you for anyone that's listening from anywhere around the world, and do feel free to drop us a comment, like, message, email, whatever. Let us know where you're listening from, because we want to hear from you.
Yeah, and if you are a Christian, I'd love for you to just pray for this channel and pray for those people, because some of them aren't in a position where they have access to the gospel very much. So that's awesome. Right, we better wrap it up, I guess.
Yeah, tomorrow's some of Galatians. Not exactly sure how many, probably 1, 2, and 3, but we'll see when we get there.
Love it. See you later.